example of one of the pigments. This is blue stain. This is the most common. I'm sure you're all familiar with blue stain. Hopefully. Well,
Okay.
It happens usually when wood is fresh cut, because blue stain fungi are in the air all the time. And they land on the wood and they eat the easy available sugars. Now, the color's not actually blue, it's actually black, but the way the light hits the wood and the way all of that happens, it tends to look blue or gray or black, depending upon what wood it's on. If you like blue stained wood, there's tons of it on the market, absolutely everywhere. You can go to Home Depot and pick it up, so it's actually the easiest to come by type of spalting. It's very mild decay, so mild, in fact, that it's allowed in building codes here in the United States. So houses can be built with blue stained lumber. So you don't know, you might actually have a house out of spalted wood. It's possible. And then, so I have this piece here, again, just because we have some new people who are unfamiliar with spalted wood. There is a kind of spalting that makes this color, but this is not spalted wood. This is Boxelder wood. The tree makes this color. And the reason we make the distinction between what is spalting and what is tree color is because tree colors are not stable in light. So anyone who's ever worked with Boxelder knows that it fades over time. There's nothing you can do to keep that pigment around. Spalted wood, we have pieces, so I'll show you the book in a minute. We have pieces from the 1200s that are still just as vibrant as they were when they were first put in. Spalted wood is very color stable. Tree pigments are not. So Boxelder is very well known for its red stain. This is blue stain, so this is spalting. Here's the red stain of the tree. Likely the tree put this out to stop the blue stain that was actually coming in, because the pigments are all deadly. That's their purpose in the world, is to stop other fungi from getting on their resources. The biggest problem with the red of Boxelder is it looks great, but then woodworkers and wood turners use it, and then those pieces go in a gallery, or they get sold and someone wants to show them off, and so then they're in a window or they're somewhere, and then the light hits it, and then the color is gone. Even in just indoor light with no UV exposure, the color fades over time. Other examples of color, even just on the cover here. This is the blue-green. This was the most popular and most commonly used color type of spalting back when spalting was used historically in Europe, so in the 1200s all the way up through the 1700s. The blue-green spalted wood was hands down the most popular, the best that everyone wanted, specifically because up until about the early 1700s there was no way to make this color synthetically. So they had to rely on naturally produced color by fungi. Lots of other colors, of course. Here's some purples and reds and blues in here, some nice different colors of zone lines. I think there are, give me just a moment, there are color plates in this book. Because one of the most common questions I get is, can I spalt X wood? Of course, that's a very complicated question. So in the book, it actually goes through, this is what these different fungi look like on different wood species, because you can't just take, say, Elf's Cup, which is the blue-green one. It's not going to look the same on different woods. All fungi react differently, because they're all different organisms. So the book goes through all the different sort of known iterations of spalting. This is just the tip of the iceberg here. And it also goes into stuff, I do research in the Peruvian rainforest in the Amazon every year. I go down there and look for new spalting fungi. And they have crazy colors down there, just absolutely gorgeous stuff. And so we see a lot of things like, here's an example of orange zone lines that we find quite frequently in the Amazon. Red zone lines, green zone lines, there's a lot of lilac and purple zone lines down in the Amazon. All right, so that's the basics. Everyone feel caught up now? Yeah? We're all on the same page.
We're ready to roll.
We're ready to roll, okay. So today I wanted to talk about, before I wrote the spalting book, the most common question in my inbox was, how do I spalt wood? Which is just a ridiculous question, because it's a good question, but it's hard, because what wood species, what kind of spalting do you want? I mean, as you've already seen, there are probably several thousand options you could have. So the book has helped stem that. So now the kinds of questions I get are, how do I stabilize spalted wood? So I thought it would be good to actually talk about it, make a nice video, so maybe it would be a starting point for people when they want to start talking about stabilizing spalted wood. So, why do we need to stabilize spalted wood? You don't need to stabilize it, but some people prefer to stabilize it because it's decay. And if it goes too far, it gets really, really soft, and that's not fun to machine. When you're turning on a lathe, you can get really bad tear out. Sometimes it just crumbles. Like if this piece was wet, it's better if you're a wood turner. It's better to turn spalted wood dry because it doesn't tend to come apart so easily. But if this was wet, we could just peel it right off. So there's not a lot left to these types of pieces. So they're still beautiful. You still want to work with them. So what a lot of people do is that they stick different things in them, acrylics or other types of resins, to help stabilize the piece. Now what that does is that it fills all the void space with basically plastic. So you're turning a wood plastic composite at that point. On the plus side, very much less likely to explode on you if you don't know what you're doing. Stabilizing spalted wood started in the 70s, and its history is tied very closely to that of the reemergence of spalted wood here in North America. So if you're at all familiar with the Lindquists, Mel and Mark Lindquist, who repopularized wood turning here in North America. So their pieces are in the Met and the Smithsonian, really big name wood turners. And when they started repopularizing wood turning, they were really into spalted wood. They were really into zone lines, so a lot of their work has the black zone lines in it. And they attracted the attention of Dale Nish, who worked at Brigham Young University in their technology department, who had some graduate students who were interested in working with spalted wood. And one of those graduate students, Kip Christensen, decided to make it his master's thesis project to look at well, what if we want to use this wood? So the whole process started with methacrylation, with methyl methacrylate. And there are pictures in the book of that process. Kip was nice enough to share them to me, of the original huge chamber they used, the huge pressure chamber, the methyl methacrylate that they used and how that worked. And I've seen the pieces that were done that were collaborations between Nish and the Lindquists for stabilizing spalted wood. The problem is that takes a huge chamber, and methyl methacrylate's really not super great for you, like a lot of things involved in wood turning, unfortunately. Actually, I'm going to pass this piece around. If you want to see, just touch it right here, you can get an idea of why stabilization can be necessary in sometimes. So for a long time, all we really had was methacrylation. And now technology is catching up. So what we have now are a whole host of different products. I have specifically not brought them to physically show you because I know what happens when I talk about stuff on the internet, and I don't want to be like the walking endorsement for different products. But I will talk about them. The first thing I want to say, though, is if you are a wood turner, specifically, it's not necessary to stabilize your spalted wood if you know what you're doing and how to turn it. You can, if you want to, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with stabilized spalted wood at all. But don't feel like you have to stabilize it. If you know how to use the tools, if you have nice sharp tools, if you don't mind dealing with tear out, you won't have too many problems. But for the beginners, for those who really don't want to deal with 4 hours of sanding, stabilization is a really good option. So there are sort of 3 classes of stabilizers on the market right now. The one that they use here that I will show, and the one that's becoming increasingly popular is Cactus Juice. And if you want to know what's in it, you can look up the MSDS online. It's applied very similarly to methacrylation, in which you need some type of chamber. You're going to submerge it, you're going to pull a vacuum. When it comes out, you're going to cook it. And so that forces the product into the wood, and then it hardens, and you get more of an even density within it. I would consider that sort of the most invasive form of stabilization, because it's stabilizing the entire piece, your whole piece, and they have a whole bucket of the stuff over there, and you can feel it. It does very much feel like plastic. There's still some wood to it. It's very heavy. It takes on a lot of weight. But it's also very, very stable. It's great for pens and things like that if you don't want the wood moving. Now, on the other end of that are the things that we use in my lab, the Applied Mycology lab. When we teach students how to work with spalted wood, we try not to give them too many crutches right off the bat, because we want them to understand a lot of the science behind it before they really start working with polymers. And so we tend to use the cyanoacrylate glues. Those are the super glues. There is a company called Starbond, I'm sure they're online, that you can get all these different CA glues from, and they come in a whole bunch of different viscosities. And one of the best ones that I found for spalted wood is they're super thin. And that's because, where'd my super punky piece go? Oh, great. If you have a piece like this and you really want to keep its lightness, its airiness, I like wood like this, but that really, really soft area here, if you're really concerned about that just ripping out, or even if you just have like a piece of bark that's on that you don't want to lose, that super thin CA, it's basically invisible. So you can put it just in these very, very soft areas, and all it kind of does is just kind of tighten things up. Even when you turn it, you won't feel a density difference. There's not a big change in how the wood feels, but it does help kind of bind things up a little bit. And it comes in a bunch of different thicknesses. So if super thin isn't your bag, you know, you can do a medium thick, you can do a thick. The thick starts edging into epoxy land, which is a whole different thing to talk about. But when you want to do just spot areas, you know, again, if you're concerned about just these little bits over here, I love to just put in just a little bit of super thin CA, and then things stay together a lot better without that change in texture, which can be really frustrating to woodworkers. Yeah?
I assume you paint it on it.
The epoxy, or not the epoxy, the CA? No, the super thin CA absorbs very, very quickly. And so when it can be put on like in a line or a circle, but mostly it comes in, Starbond will send you these little containers that have very fine tips with these little, like, almost like needle-like tips on them. And you can just sit it right on the wood, and you can see if you have hairline cracks or anything, it's really good for that too, because the CA will actually follow the hairline crack all the way down through your wood and hold it together. Again, without that very visible glue line coming down.
Do you go beyond the point you want to do? You know, a millimeter or something like that?
So the question is, how far do you glue down? I usually glue right where I want it, because you gotta remember, wood is hygroscopic, and it does, most moisture it'll try and equilibrate it, and so the wood is naturally gonna pull it more than where you put it. So that's, if any of you have ever seen any videos of me where I dye spalted wood using the fungal pigments, because we have a process in the lab where we can grow the fungi outside of the wood and then harvest their pigments and put them in, so you don't have to actually have decay with your spalted wood, which is nice because then you don't end up with this. I do the same thing with those. They're put on well away from the point at which I want them to go to, because the wood will take them the rest of the way. And it's the same. Zone lines, again, are a really thick melanin barrier, and so they tend to stop stuff. And so if you're putting in glue here, it's not going to go past that zone line unless you put it on so fast that it runs over the surface of the wood. So zone lines are really nice like that. On the plus side, usually wood on one side of the zone line is decayed, and on the other side is a lot more sound. That's really common, just because of how fungi grow. So then there's epoxies, but epoxies are more for filling gaps than anything else. So if you do have something like this, nice, wow, very nice. And for some reason, some people really like the insect frass that comes in these, and if you want to stabilize that, or if you want to do, if you want to pigment your epoxy, or you want to put wood chips or wood dust in your epoxy and make a nice fill, epoxy's really nice for that. You can also use the super thick CA glue from Starbond. That isn't quite as thick as the epoxy and will kind of move into the wood just a little bit. But it gives you sort of an in-between between the Cactus Juice, which is the whole thing is stabilized, the epoxy is larger areas but not the whole piece, versus the CAs, especially the super thins, that are just very much just here, or just here, or just here, without needing to change, really.
Do you recommend using the activator with it?
The activators for the CA glues. So the activators are great if you're using CA for something like a finish, which is becoming very popular, where it's on the lathe and people will put the CA glue on, and then the CAs only really stick with pressure, right, or over time. And so when the lathe is moving, you can put your finger on and move the CA, and it creates a pretty shiny finish, and then you can use the activator. The thing is, the activator doesn't move into the wood, and so if you put CA glue on your wood, it's moving in, and then you put the activator on, all it's done is stabilize the stuff on the surface, and then when you go to turn it, all that wet CA is still there. I think it gives you a false sense of dryness. And if you've ever had CA on your face, that's real fun. It gets on my glasses. I've got 4 or 5 pairs of shop glasses that are just like CA bubbles. Don't do it. So that's kind of an overview of stabilizing spalted wood. And that's just for spalted wood. Now remember that there's plenty of wood out there that isn't spalted that people like to stabilize for whatever reasons, and the rules are different for stable wood. They're different for figured woods, but spalted wood is a very unique sort of beast, and things just work in it very differently because it has so much void space. Questions about stabilizing? Yeah.
Does this Cactus Juice, do you need to have a vacuum and?
So for the Cactus Juice, you are supposed to, I believe, have a vacuum, although it won't work as well, but it will still work if you if you submerge it and weight it down and leave it there for a while, because again, the wood will naturally pick it up. It's just not going to be as fast or as far. Remember, even with vacuuming, stuff doesn't move into the wood all the way. You know, it stops at the heartwood, and it doesn't even fully penetrate into the sapwood. So you can think that you're, pressure treating something, but you're really, if you're getting in an inch, you're lucky. Now, if it's spalted wood, it's going to go in a lot further because it doesn't have a lot of the natural boundaries in it.
The figure will affect it.
Figure affects everything. Figure is a big deal because when the fibers aren't growing straight, all of a sudden the whole game is off. So any type of figure means that the fibers are deviating from that 90 degrees, or from the long axis of the stem. So like curly is 90 degrees to the long axis of the stem. Quilted is when it alternates, so there's a whole bunch of different things in there. And so when you, I know it's a lot. So when you're trying to put something into wood, and all of a sudden most of the stem isn't running up and down, you're going to have a lot harder time getting things to diffuse properly.
I think that's where the vacuum really helps, because it does. We'll run the vacuum maybe overnight or longer, so we're not getting bubbles.
Vacuums are useful. They can be slightly problematic with conifers. I don't think you guys work with conifers at all, but remember that conifers, they have a different cellular structure, and so they have pits that they have these borders in their pits that can aspirate. And so if you pull too tight a vacuum when you're trying to pressure treat conifers, you can actually make it harder to pressure treat them because there's a little divider and it'll block off the pits, which is a tree's natural response to wounding, is to block off its tracheids. This is why I teach wood anatomy, right? It's very important. You have to be a good wood anatomist to understand spalting. More?
Where do you teach?
I'm a professor at Oregon State. And we have, if you like spalting and you like this kind of stuff, we have a new program actually. So within the Renewable Materials program, we have 3 tracks, and one of them is the Art and Design track. And that's where we work specifically with figured woods and spalted woods and the aesthetic use of wood. So not so much tall building construction, not so much composites, but we actually work with the decorative woods and utilize doing things like furniture design and stuff like that with them. And we do actually have classes on spalting that you can take. And a new wood turning studio. That's our biggest thing, right? Is that we just put in a brand new wood turning studio. So students can now take wood turning at a beginner and a more advanced level, but from a science end. And so they learn about wood anatomy and the anatomy of what's going on in here while they're turning, which for a lot of hands-on learners is a lot better than learning out of a book. More exciting questions? Oh, wow, look at, someone brought fancy pictures.
These are some. I think they're yours, aren't they?
The better question is, why do you have pictures of mine printed off in laminated? Super fan over there.
That's the real anatomy there.
All right, so I don't know how well these are going to come up on the video. These are a hardwood, and I can tell because it's got these vessels. These are so we're looking at these are the ray ends. I'm using words that none of you have any idea what I'm talking about. Let's back up. Most of the cells in wood run up and down. A few run in and out, and those are called the rays, right? And they help facilitate flow in and out of the tree versus just up and down. That's also where all the sugars, well, not all the sugars, that's where a lot of the free sugars are stored. So that's why, I don't know if we have any examples here. That's why when you see early stages of spalted wood, the pigment looks like it's running in and out from the pith, because that's the way the rays are running, and that's where the easy sugar is. So fungi are lazy, just like people, so they'll go for the easy sugar first before they move into the actually having to decay the wood. So these are the ray ends, and these are the vessels here. Why this is interesting, so this is a transverse view, so now we're looking, the tree's growing this way, right? And here are vessels, and wow, this is a piece of figured wood. It's getting weird. And we also have a transition over here. These are rays here, and you can see that that's where the pigment is. That's because that's where the fungi have gone preferentially to grow before they actually start decaying the wood. Because decaying wood is tough. You got to secrete enzymes. You got to break down those big long sugar polymers. No one wants to do that if they can avoid it. So you go to the tree's lunchbox, and you hang out there, and you eat all the food in its fridge before you start breaking down the house. Which is why, if you know what you're doing when you're spalting, you can stop the spalting when it's still here before it gets to here, and then you have very sound wood with color that doesn't have a lot of decay. And that's one of the reasons that I don't do a lot of stabilization, is because I don't need to, because we spalt everything in the lab and know when to stop it before the wood gets super decayed. That's it. It's your stabilization talk.